Ladies and gents, welcome back to another video. Today we've got a 2019 4K iMac and we're going to be talking about its value here in 2026. We're going to go over the specs of my unit, the different configurations you could get, the current price of these on the used market. We're going to run through some benchmarks, talk about some of the good things, the bad things, talk about software support, and then we'll decide if this iMac is worth it here in 2026. So let's go ahead and begin with the specs of my specific unit. So I have pretty much a base configuration model. It's got the 3.6 GHz quad-core i3. That's an Intel 8th generation CPU. That's paired with 8 GB of DDR4 memory and Radeon Pro 555X graphics card with 2 GB of GDDR5 VRAM. Now, where things get interesting is the storage. My unit has an upgraded storage. This is a 1 TB drive. This SSD was actually added after the fact, and it is not how this computer came from the factory. Most of these units came with a 1 TB spinning hard drive or a 1 TB Fusion drive, which paired 1 TB hard drive with 28 GB of flash storage. Now, the hard drive and the Fusion drives are incredibly slow on newer versions of macOS. So let's head over to Apple's website and look at the different configurations you could get when this iMac was new. So the 3.6 GHz quad-core i3 was the standard configuration. You could upgrade to a 3.0 GHz 6-core i5 or a 3.2 GHz 6-core i7 with hyperthreading. The i5 and the i7 are quite a bit faster than the i3, and you get 6 cores with each along with hyperthreading in the i7 model. The memory came standard with 8, or you could go all the way up to 16 or 32 gigabytes. I do believe you can actually get 64 in this if you take it apart and upgrade the RAM, because it does actually have 2 SODIMM slots. They're just really hard to get to. You have to completely disassemble the Mac. In terms of graphics, this thing came standard with the 555X, which I have here. You could get the 560X, which doubled the VRAM and was quite a bit more powerful, or you could go all out and get the Radeon Vega Pro 20, which came with 4 GB of HBM2 memory, which is super high bandwidth, and that graphics configuration is actually pretty powerful and puts this Mac on par with some of the Apple Silicon computers that replaced it. And I completely skipped over storage. You could get 256 gigabytes of solid-state storage stock from Apple, and interestingly, that is the only SSD configuration you could get on this computer, although I believe that is not entirely true. I swear you could have gotten up to 1 TB of solid-state drive in this iMac, but I guess that's not what Apple says according to their website. But okay, so I've got pretty much the base configuration, although I do have a 1 TB solid state drive that was added after the fact. Let's go ahead and run the disk speed test and see just how quick that is. So we'll go ahead and read and write a 5 GB file onto that internal SSD, and you can see that the write speeds are a little under 450 megabytes per second, hovering right around 430. And the read speeds are just a little bit faster at around 470, almost 470 megabytes per second there. So this is actually very usable here in 2026, and unless you're moving a bunch of large files around, SSD speeds like this should perform very well. However, if you do have the Fusion drive or the 1 TB spinning hard drive, this thing is going to be super slow, and honestly, I can't even recommend that for most people at all. All right, moving on, let's run Geekbench 6. This is going to show us the CPU and the GPU performance of our computer. You can see once again, these are the configurations that I've got. Base model, quad-core i3. There is no hyperthreading and there is no turbo boost on this i3, which is actually very interesting. So let me run these benchmarks and we'll see what we get. Okay, here are the numbers. This is the CPU score, single core coming in at 1,221, multi-core at 3,603. And that multi-core score is actually slower than the single core score is on the newer M5 Macs that are currently available. And I actually think it's slower than the M4, at least in some of the configurations. The GPU score is not a whole lot better, coming in at 19,173. This puts it below all of the Apple Silicon computers. And in 2026, this is not competitive at all in any regards. Now, just to show you guys how much power this chip can draw, here is Intel Power Gadget, and we can max out all 4 cores on our CPU. And you can see on that top chart there, the CPU is drawing just a little over 15 watts of power. So this chip is really not using a whole lot of energy, and you can see the temperatures are well below 50 degrees Celsius, and I believe this thing can max out at 100 degrees Celsius. And the cooling on this computer is fantastic, at least for that quad-core i3. If you get the i7, this thing does run quite a bit warmer, but Honestly, with the base configuration here, I don't think you will ever hear the fan on this iMac because that CPU actually doesn't use a whole lot of power. All right, next up, let's do a little gaming. Let's fire up Minecraft and see how this performs on our iMac. All right, here we are loaded into the creative world on Minecraft, and let me go ahead and show you guys my settings. We've got 1440p because I just don't think 4K is going to work very well on this system. Render distance at 24, simulation at 12. I turned clouds off, and I believe everything else is stock. And let's see how we do. So let's go ahead and take a flight through the world here. This is actually a very dense map with some trees, a lot of things for this computer to render. And as we fly forward, it seems like the frame rates are okay. It's certainly not a smooth 60, and I am recording this video in 60 frames per second, so if you're watching at 60, you should be able to see exactly how this display is outputting the frames. But it is pretty smooth, I would say. If we drop down to the ground here and kind of run around, if we were playing on if we were playing on survival mode, I'd say this is actually very smooth. You certainly wouldn't need the full 24 render distance to play on survival mode, at least not at all times. You could bump that up and down if you really needed to. Definitely playable here on the ground, but it seems like once more of the map loads and we kind of fly through the regions here, and the computer has to do a lot of different processing, we do run into some stutters, and hopefully that's going to show up for you guys as well here that are watching this. Oh, there's a big stutter there. I think we're probably running into a limitation either with the 8 gigabytes of system memory or the 2 gigabytes of VRAM. I think that is just not enough for modern games. And I know Minecraft is not that new, but they continue to update it and it becomes more and more resource intensive every single year. So Minecraft is certainly playable, but you're going to have to be a little bit patient with it. It's not going to be as smooth as some newer computers. Now, if we flip over to the rear, we do have quite a nice port selection. We've got a headphone jack, we've got an SD card reader, 4 USB 3.0 ports, 2 USB-C ports, Ethernet, and then we've got the power connection there as well as a safety slot down below. Unfortunately, no upgradable RAM, at least not externally like the 27-inch iMacs have. You have to take this computer completely apart to access the memory, and that is actually a bit of a process. But overall, port selection on these is pretty good, and I think you will not be disappointed with what this computer has to offer in terms of connecting peripherals. Okay, let's look at pricing for this iMac. So if we head over to eBay, we're going to search for 2019 iMac 4K, and we're going to see what listings come up. Let's sort by buy it now, and let's take a look and see what these are going for. Here is one, well, this guy's got 0 positive feedback. Let's be a little careful there. This actually looks pretty decent, $250. Let's open some of these in a new tab, and then we will go through them and look at what the options are in terms of the different models we can see here. This one doesn't look too bad. And how about another one here just to get a good reference point? I'm trying to stay away from the 1 terabyte hard drives. Sometimes it's a little tricky because people will say 1 terabyte SSD, but it is actually just a 1 terabyte hard drive or a 1 terabyte Fusion drive. The computer autofill or the eBay autofill puts a solid state drive. Like, we'll take a look at this listing here. I would be shocked if that's actually a 1 terabyte solid state. I bet that is a 1 terabyte hard drive. Okay, so here's the first listing. This is $250, and I don't know if that includes shipping. And it looks like that's with free shipping, so not bad at all. Let's see what these specs are here. So that's the 6-core i5 and the upgraded Radeon Pro 460X with 16 gigabytes of memory, and looks like 250 gigabytes of solid state storage. So not a whole lot of storage, but I would definitely get that 256 gigabyte solid state over a 1 terabyte hard drive or a 1 terabyte Fusion drive. So do we have some damage? It looks like maybe just some sticker residue, but this thing's definitely not in the best condition. But $250, you can score yourself a mid-tier 4K iMac. Here's one that is $200, but I believe the shipping on this was $100. Yeah, this is quoting at over $100, which is kind of crazy. I know it's not that much to ship, so I don't know what to make with that. This has the high-end 6-core i7, but it only has the base configuration graphics, which is a little strange. And then it's got the 256 gigabyte solid state drive. So again, not bad, but graphics is going to hold you back there on this computer. But if you're just doing something really CPU intensive, then not a bad deal here. Here's our last configuration. This was the one that says it's got a solid state drive, but I just don't believe that is true. Let's see what we've got here. So base configurations there with the CPU, RAM, and graphics, and they're not going to show us the storage unless it says in the description. No, I mean, if it had said, okay, the internal hard drive's been replaced with a solid state drive, then I might believe it, but there's no way this has a 1 terabyte solid state drive in there. So it seems like overall you can get one of these for under $300. You could probably get one close to 200 if you spend a few days waiting for new listings to pop up. But overall, not a bad value for this 2019 4K iMac. Here's another one. I just want to see if there's one with a 1 terabyte solid state drive. I just don't think there is. Yeah, I think those are going to have to be upgraded yourself or from someone else, but you can do that. You can upgrade the solid state drive inside of these, and you can actually upgrade the RAM and the CPU if you really take the whole thing apart. So it is actually fairly upgradable. Perhaps the most compelling reason to get this iMac is for its display. It is a 4K screen with good brightness, good colors, and unfortunately it's only 60 Hertz, so no ProMotion here on this iMac. But that said, for the majority of people, you might not even notice. And if you've never used anything beyond a 60 Hertz screen, then you're not going to notice a difference at all. It does have some pretty big bezels, but I think all things considered, the age of this computer as well as the price point that these are currently at, I think for the money you're paying, this is actually a really good screen, and you might actually be hard pressed to find another display like this for a similar price point with the same specs that this iMac has, let alone being attached to a whole computer. So I think the screen on these are fantastic and is definitely a good reason to consider getting one of these. Now we got to talk about software support because this iMac has not seen an update in a couple years. So we've got macOS Golden Gate has been announced. It is not released yet at the time of recording this video, but hopefully it's a big improvement on macOS Tahoe, which I think had a fair number of shortcomings and performance problems. This iMac did not get macOS Tahoe, and it's definitely not going to get macOS Golden Gate, as you can see here. Only Apple Silicon computers are compatible with macOS 27. But that might not be a big deal to some people because macOS Sequoia, which is where this thing finishes support, is actually a really refined and good operating system. I like this a lot, and I actually still use Sequoia on my main computer. So this thing finishing software support on Sequoia, macOS 15, might not be a deal breaker for many people. However, you are potentially going to run into some security issues and then maybe some lack of functionality in future versions of applications or websites as software update moves on and this thing gets left behind. Overall, I think the 2019 iMac is a good value for what you get. You get a beautiful 4K display. It's got pretty nice speakers. It looks really good. The port selection is pretty nice. Performance does leave quite a bit to be desired, especially with some of the low-end configurations. And I honestly really think you have to get a solid state drive on one of these to be able to use it in 2026. Going with that hard drive or the Fusion drive, which is really not much better, is just going to really slow you down. And I think you'll get frustrated with this computer, and it's going to feel like it's a lot older than it is based on the performance with a mechanical hard drive or a Fusion drive. So definitely go solid state, and I think you've got yourself a very usable daily computer for lots of different tasks. You could even do some light video editing on here, definitely do some photo editing. You can play some light games, and I think this is an overall a pretty good value for what you get. This was Apple's last 4K iMac and the last Intel iMac with this design. Let me know down in the comments how you feel about the 2019 iMac, and if any of you guys are still using one of these, let me know how it's holding up for you. So with that said, thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, I look forward to seeing you in another one of my videos.